My name is Alistair Wheat. I am the head of social media consulting at Gorkana, and this is how you can contact me. I'd welcome feedback if you've got information or requests for further sessions. Please get in touch via email or contact me on Twitter here, and feel free to also put questions through the question panel on the Citrix interface, or send them to us via Twitter, either to me or to the @Gorkana Twitter handle, or you can use the Gorkana Social hashtag. We're going to allow about 35 minutes for the talk, and then about 10 minutes of questions at the end. And if we have more questions, we'll take those on Twitter afterwards. So this is a first in a three-part series on social media insights. Today we're going to be looking at understanding context and sentiment, and looking at how we can go beyond just simple charts and actually try and understand what the key themes are that are driving some of the trends that you might see when we look at the bigger numbers. Also, we're going to look at a bit of how to get the most out of sentiment analysis. Part 2, coming on June the 11th, we're going to be looking at horizon scanning, which is trying to listen to subjects where brands are not being mentioned, to look at subjects or themes that are being discussed, and to try and understand potential risks that might affect your business before you get mentioned as an organization, or alternatively to look at ways to identify trends in the wider discussion that you can then use to improve your own messaging or your marketing campaigns. Part 3, on July 2nd, we're going to be looking in a bit more detail at influence. I put influence in inverted commas there because it's often a very misused term, and people in meetings I've had certainly will talk about influence in very different ways. Sometimes they're talking about authorities, sometimes they're talking about people who are popular, or they are, people who are very knowledgeable on a specific subject area, and they have a very narrow field of influence, but it's relevant to the client. So we'll look at what do people mean by influence, and then how can we actually harness that. This is not going to be another one of those clout bashing sessions where we have to go at all these automated scoring systems, how rubbish they are, etc. But we're going to look at how they are useful and do have a place, but we need to bring human insight to bear. And as we go through the series, I'm sure we'll probably have requests for additional things that aren't covered, so there will be part 4 or more, depending on the sort of the requests that we get during the course of this three-part series. So just to say who the series is for, I know people on the call who work with us have access to our tools and use them to produce social media reporting. So we've got lots of people from agencies on the call, and you may be using our tools or others to produce reports. So if that applies to you, then I'm hoping that the series will give you some practical tips for how you can improve the quality of the insights that you're providing to your clients. If you are, on the other hand, someone who receives a social media analysis report, either from us or from an agency or from maybe colleagues internally, we're going to give you some pointers for things that you can, questions that you can ask the people providing your insights, in order to maybe challenge them about some of the data behind the conclusions that they're bringing to you, or to give you ideas for new questions that you can put in, ways to challenge them and to get them to go deeper in the analysis that they're giving to you. And also there may be some of you on the call who are actually not doing either of those. You're not receiving reports, you're not producing them, but you have recognized that it's really important for you to have detailed analysis for social media. So the series will help you think about some of the things that you may want to put together in an RFP perhaps, or if you're talking to people who are doing maybe mainstream analysis like we do, or an agency, to kind of think about the questions that you want to put to them about what they should be doing if they're going to start providing you this sort of service. What the series isn't, so this is not a product demo. I will be sharing screenshots from Gorkana Social Media Pro, which is our analysis tool. We partner with Brandwatch to provide the technology for that. And I'm not going to be going into detail about exactly how I actually go about producing the charts, but I will just be showing you the results of the research. If you are a client of ours and you're already using these tools and you want to know more about how to actually go about doing some of the stuff I'm covering in this session, then please get in touch with us and we can organize further training sessions for you. This is not going to be a comparison of tools. I may reference some of other tools during the course of the talk or in the Q&A, but I'm not going to be doing any big sort of feature-by-feature comparison as to which tools are best for this sort of analysis. This might be a sales pitch, you're glad to know. Happy for you to contact us if you want to, but this is not just going to be about us. This is not a one-size-fits-all. I will be using going into detail on a particular piece of client research we did in the telecom sector, and also maybe taking an example from B2B. But if you're a charity or government, I'm hoping that still the principles will apply to your sector as well. And likewise, if you're a small business, I'm hoping that some of the principles that we go through today will still be relevant, even though we are looking at some live brands. And also, this won't be comprehensive. We're limited on time, so I won't cover everything, but I hope I'm going to just give some overarching principles that will be useful, and we can maybe go into more detail offline afterwards. So just to say a little bit about social media monitoring software, social media analysis tools. There is, I think, some of the misconception that tools are smarter than they really are, and that they can just do everything for you. And I've definitely seen examples where people have produced reports that on the surface look quite good, but maybe it can lead us to being a little bit lazy perhaps in just thinking we can push a few buttons and get really detailed insights. It's important to also just be aware that when you get these tools to run and you don't check the data, sometimes the actual conclusions that you draw from it could be wrong, potentially misleading and damaging if you take data without looking in detail at the actual trends and the themes and the people driving the conversation. So it's better to think about social media analysis tools more like this, that they are like an exoskeleton that allow us to do heavy lifting. They augment our capabilities, but ultimately you really do need a human at the center of the whole process. You need a human brain behind the analysis. And so we're going to look at how we need to use automation to get through some of the many millions of social media posts that we may want to analyze, but we do need to scrutinize it, and humans are the best at that still, thankfully. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to look in more detail at understanding context and sentiment analysis. So looking then at sentiment analysis, we're going to look at how to get the most of the automated tools. We're also going to look at how to slice data to see what's really going on behind the big numbers. And then also to try and look a bit at what does good look like. So if you're planning a campaign or you're setting KPIs, how are you going to know whether you've achieved your results? How are you going to know what a good level of engagement is, or if you've got a crisis, how do you figure out whether it's actually a big crisis or it's actually not very big at all? So we're going to look at principles around wider listening, looking at subjects, and benchmarking against peers to try and see what sort of numbers you might want to expect when you're active in this space. So just to talk about automated sentiment analysis now, the first point to make is that mistakes will be made. The machines are never going to understand language as well as a human being, so it won't take you long, and those of you who use social media tools will probably know many examples where the automated sentiment analyzers got it wrong, sometimes with quite hilarious results. They are often really bad at understanding jokes and sarcasm, etc. So we do need to help the poor machines. There is definitely a case to be made for manual analysis for certain types of content, or manual review just to check the overall quality. But I think with the volumes that we're dealing with, we can say that there is safety in numbers, so that even though you get some posts wrong, often the positive and the negative misclassifications will cancel each other out when you've got large volumes of data. But provided you've got around about 70% accuracy, the overall conclusions are not going to change, even though you may get some posts here and there that are wrong. But there are other things we can do to help get the accuracy right, and one of those is to focus on short-form content like Twitter and Facebook. So with Twitter and Facebook, there's often just maybe a single message, and it's easy for the automated analyzer to figure out what's going on when they don't have multiple messages. Longer-form content like blogs and news sites will often have quite mixed messages, and there may be a combination of both positive and negative mentions, and the machines can often struggle to really know how to weight that and whether they cancel each other out. And neutral is not the same thing as balanced. So you may have neutral, which is just factual, and balanced, which means it's got both positive and negative, and machines don't really tend to understand balanced sentiments. So if you look at Twitter and Facebook, you'll get a more accurate scoring of positive and negative tonality. The tricky thing here, though, is that depending on the sector that you're in, sometimes forums are a very important channel to analyze. So if it's something to do with personal health or personal finances or relationships, people may want to post on forums because they can post anonymously. They don't want to post with their Twitter or Facebook profiles because they don't want their friends and family to know the problem or the concerns or the interest that they've got. Or it could be that the subject matter is very detailed. So when it comes to financial products or travel and tourism, sometimes people want to have a more detailed conversation, or software and hardware as well. People may want to get into detail. And therefore, it's important to make sure that your sentiment analysis covers forums if you operate in one of those sectors, and not just rely on Twitter or Facebook, where the real meat in some of the conversations will be missed. I would say that the good thing about Twitter and Facebook is that in some sense they are a bit like Twitter is a bit like the the whistle on a pressure cooker, in that it captures people's feelings and their opinions at the moment of time when they're actually feeling good or badly about a brand or product. So often, if people are, I don't know, stuck on a train and they can't go screaming in the middle of the carriage, they don't have anyone to shout at, but via Twitter, they can actually go and sort of express what they feel, and sometimes that's a bit therapeutic for people. And especially when you've got a larger brand, you get a lot of insight into what people are saying. And blogs, forums, so blogs and news sites are important. Those are sort of sites where maybe there's a case to be made for having some more manual analysis, in that you need somebody to go and look in detail at the different types of messaging that you're getting. For forums, it's a bit tricky because the forums, again, can be kind of long form, sometimes in detail, but depending on the subject matter, forums can be really important. So if you're working in the healthcare space, or it's to do with the relationships or personal finance or medicines, then often people don't want to post with their real social media profile. So they don't want people to know who they are. They want to be able to post anonymously. Or it could be a subject area where you need some real technical expertise, or you need to post in detail. So that could be software or hardware questions, detailed financial products, or stuff to do with travel and tourism. So forums can be really important for those sectors. So if you are going to do sentiment analysis in those areas, you don't want to exclude forums, because that can give you a distorted view. You may want to include forums as part of your short form analysis. But also saying to focus on positive versus negative sentiment. So with social media analysis, quite often the large majority of content is neutral in tone. So it's people sharing content, it's people sharing facts and information. And we really want to focus on where people are actually having a good or bad experience. The automated sentiment analyzers are also really geared up towards getting the positive and negative right. And where they're not sure, they typically will put something down as neutral. So try to strip out the neutral content when really getting an overview of sentiment. I'll show you examples of how that works. It's also important to understand what sentiment looks like for the category as a whole, not just the specific brands, because that will have a big effect on people's mindset when they come to talk about your brand. You may also want to exclude brand-owned channels, competitions, campaigns, and e-commerce. So in some sectors, the brands themselves will be doing a lot of their own posting, and you want to exclude that to try and get the actual customer's opinions. It's quite easy sometimes to put competitions out, retweet to win, and that can also really skew the sentiment, because people just start, using words like win and I can't, I'm looking forward to winning something, or great prize, etc. So you want to try and strip that out. Likewise, campaigns, they can be good to measure in themselves, but you may want to kind of remove those from your actual customer insights. And likewise, e-commerce, some subject areas, especially consumer technology, there's a lot of people who just use Twitter to post about selling them deals and stuff like that, and you want to remove that sort of content. Finally, watch out for spikes. Spikes can occur for any number of reasons, but quite often you'll see that maybe there's a comedian who's made a joke, and that, especially if it's sarcastic, can really confuse the automated analyzers. Or it could be, you quite often see these facts being shared on Twitter, and they're not really facts, but they're just interesting things, and people share them a lot. And so you may want to try and remove that sort of content from your results. So we get requests for social media analysis from clients all the time. Sometimes they come in the form of an RFP. And this is the sort of thing I sometimes get. There's a list of bullet points as what the client wants. I get that. And I mean, literally just that. Sometimes it's, bullet point, I want sentiment analysis in a report. Well, what do they mean? How do I take that as an analyst and actually make something useful for the client? Well, I'm going to go through that specific example now of how we can take, and sometimes we've had that as a requirement, and we've gone away and produced something really interesting for the client. So I've been going through this. I'm talking a little bit about how I would do this. So again, this is partly personal preference. Again, I'm using a particular tool here, and how you go about this will be limited to some degree by the software that you've got. But I was going to take you through an example of how I would go about answering this question for a client and telling them something interesting. So here are two brands in social media. Which brand is doing better? So we've got quite a year's worth of data for the one on the left, and 90 days worth of data for the one on the right. So which brand is doing better here? We've got 76% positive to 24% negative for posts that have sentiment for brand one, and about 50-50 for brand two. You may guess this is a trick question, but brand one obviously looks like they're doing better. But how about if I tell you then that brand one is Benecol? If anyone who doesn't know them, they're the probiotic yogurt drink, and Vodafone is brand two, the mobile phone giant. Does that change maybe how you think about which brand's doing better? So let's look at the industry as a whole. So we've actually got here's a year's worth of data looking at about a dozen yogurt brands. People talking about yogurt drinks in English across multiple markets, and we've seen an 87% to 13% positive to negative. Whereas looking at the UK mobile phone operators, actually it's 60% negative versus 40% positive. So people seem to not have much nice things to say, many nice things to say about the mobile phone providers. They're less attentive and more likely to complain, but people love yogurts. So look at the sort of things people say about yogurts. So here's the one in the middle. Overnight oats with Alpro UK, hashtag almond milk. Can't believe these are new to me as they are amazing. No reason to miss breakfast again. And the one at the bottom, thank you Muller yogurts, just made my morning, taste of heaven. Now, I don't know why people feel the need to post this to Twitter, but they do, and it's quite useful if you want to analyze your brand. But there you can see people talking, saying all these lovely things about the yogurts that they're eating, but not the same story with mobile phones. So if we look at Benecol then against the yogurt brands as a whole, we can see that actually they're performing considerably below the industry average for yogurt brands. So we can actually see maybe they're really not doing so well. So that pie chart on the left actually is bad, real Benecol. I did look at this and I could see that there's actually been quite a bit of discussion about how the health benefits of probiotic drinks have been a bit over-exaggerated, and maybe Benecol's not quite as good for you as it's been made out to be, but it's still good. Whereas if we look then at the mobile phone sector, because actually Vodafone is performing a fair bit above the industry average. So actually that pie chart there, although on the surface it looks bad, is actually good. So that's why it's important to look at the context and look at the industry as a whole, to look at your sentiment for you and your competitors, and even just generally about the products where there's no brand mentioned at all. So let's look a little bit more in detail at the mobile phone sector. So here we see the neutral content again dominating. It's a little bit hard to see on here really what the share is, sort of positives to negatives, because the bit for red for EE, everything everywhere is bigger, but then their whole bar is bigger. So it's actually easy to look at it a bit like this. So here we are, the sentiment pie charts, and again I've stripped the neutral out, and you can clearly see here that actually there's one particular operator that stands out from the others in terms of having a problem with negative sentiment. The tricky thing here though is that with all of these brands there is quite a lot of their own activity and e-commerce. So if we strip that out and see what the brand sentiment looks like, it actually looks a little bit worse even for EE. So in terms of the actual customer content, it's almost 4-to-1 negative to positive. So as an analyst looking at this, I'm thinking, well, whoa, what's going on here? Why is this such a bad share of negative to positive for EE? So let's have a look at a negative word cloud. So I'm just getting a word cloud of all the words and phrases where there's been some negative expression towards EE. And I need to start trying to figure out some trends in here, what's going on here. So this is the point where we need to look at how to dissect data. So some principles when it comes to dissecting data. First of all, we need to actually try and create a structure by using rules to categorize and tag content so we can actually see what's going on underneath those bigger numbers. And we want to begin really by breaking things down by content, by division or product area. So if you're a business that does multiple things, trying to break down the social media content by the divisions or the products that you service is a good starting point. It's also good where you can to align your social media categorization with your PR measurement headings. So if you've got certain things that you look to measure as part of your PR content, try as much as possible to do that with your social media analysis as well. Tag marketing campaigns and responses. Again, you probably want to look at that in isolation, but if you want to get a real grasp of what customers think about you, you may want to actually tag marketing campaigns and the responses to those, and then actually take those out of the data set that you look at. Also tag competitions and jokes, so you can try and take those out of the equation as well, to give you a clearer view of what's the actual organic content coming from your customers. So once you've done all that, you're able to start looking at organic themes and trends, and then you want to start trying to group them and quantify them. So you kind of need to start off with some hypotheses when you look at the data. So, you know, I think I can see a trend here, and then you need to go into detail and start looking at whether that's the case. So let's go back to our word cloud. And I can see in here there's a few terms here that I might want to be able to group together. So there we go. So stuff about the signal, 4G, speed, e-signal, the network, etc. And then I can actually use the tool that I've got to start categorizing that. So this is the only time I'm going to write a search string, you'll be glad to know, but this is for some of the sort of things that we may want to put into the search terms. So I'm looking for these sort of words, and I'm saying if you pick up those sort of words, then would add a tag called coverage. Now when I look at the word cloud and I include that tag, it's very clear to see that coverage is one of the main things that's driving the negative sentiment. So this is people complaining about the signal or not having any coverage at all. And then we can start to look at that as part of the overall share of voice. So we've looked at the sort of negative to positive for each brand, but now I want to look at overall share of voice to see, if I look at Signal as a whole and negative talks about Signal, what's the share of voice of them? So this is my overall share of voice. So about 40% of all of the mentions of a network operator were about EE, and O2 and Vodafone roughly similar, 3 a little bit behind in terms of volume. If I then look at the neutral, or sort of the coverage in the Signal, I can see that when people are talking about that, more than half the posts are about E. Now that could be, again, a bit of a sign as to something not quite right there. So you can see that there's a disproportionate amount of people talking about their Signal there. And then if I look at neutral and positive overall, I can see that the share of neutral mentions, positive mentions, is broadly in line with my overall share of voice. So nothing big to say there, except perhaps that maybe 3 are doing a little bit better on the positive side than because I remember they had 15%, whereas they get 19% to the positive, so that might be a good signal for 3. But then if you look at the negative, wow, look at that. So 67% of all of the negative posts about the signal on a mobile phone network are about EE, so more than twice as much as all of those put together. So we start seeing that there really is something going wrong here for that brand. Then start looking at some of the top tweets, maybe just to see if we can get a clue about specific things that might have happened. And we can see that these are some of the top tweets of some media outlets, and so 3 on the same day talking about a network outage. And I particularly like this tweet here: everything everywhere except phone signal on your phone. So clearly a lot of people not very happy, and this I think happened over a 3-day period. So I want to start looking at that, and I can see clearly a couple of massive spikes. So this is looking at negative mentions by week, and I can see 2 massive spikes there, one on the 3rd week beginning the 3rd of February and one on the 17th of March. So big spikes in negative content. However, we want to look at that and see whether any of the other networks have that. And you can, so this is now looking at people talking about signal problems, and you can see that the other networks didn't really have any problems like this, any outages in this 6-month period. But maybe let's look a little bit further back and see what about the previous 6 months. So here we can see that O2 and Vodafone both had outages in the previous 6 months. But if you compare that, we're looking at maybe 2,000 or 3,000 mentions versus 10 or 20,000 mentions. So the order of magnitude for the E outage was considerably larger. The slightly ironic thing, perhaps, is that around about this time, there was lots of stories in the press about how EE was named as the best mobile phone network. And there was coverage like this in the Telegraph. It was also in the BBC. And you see, this is on the 13th of March, so just a few days before that outage. And here's another piece from the Huffington Post. So I don't know if you can see here, but it says that there's a sample of 840,000 pieces of data used. They drove around Britain and measured the signal, this company called Root Metrics, and that's how they've compiled this data. So EE came out top, Vodafone actually came out bottom in the survey. This was actually in the national news, and they tried to get comments from all these providers. But the social media story seems to paint a rather different picture. So the question then is, are these outages distorting the overall view? And is it just a couple of bad days have actually made the overall story look bad? So again, as an analyst, I want to look at this and I want to see, do these outages change the overall picture? So what I've done is I've actually put a tag in to exclude all of the data from all of the operators just for those 2 weeks to see whether that changes the overall picture. So here's the results. So actually, no, the story is still looking not particularly good for EE. So if you compare that to previously, so it's a bit of an improvement, but it's still massively more negative than the other providers who are all, broadly speaking, the same. So conclusion from this exercise is that we've basically gone through and tried to slice the data in different ways, is that there is definitely a problem here with sentiment towards the mobile phone coverage on the EE network. And you may want to ask, what's a more reliable measure? We've got this, widely covered piece of research done by Root Metrics, 850,000 pieces of data. But on here, we're actually looking at over 4 million pieces of social media content just on Twitter for people customers talking about their experiences on these networks. So hopefully that's just a bit of a walkthrough as to some of those principles, looking at how to make use of automated sentiment scoring. I haven't really done much in the way of any manual analysis on this. And also then how to dissect the data to actually try and see underneath what's going on. So the key things in here is to ask the right questions. So one of the questions I put in was, does the sentiment around the outages distort the overall picture? The answer there was actually no, it didn't. And again, as you're looking through these sort of things, you want to ask questions, but be aware that sometimes, the answer may not change the overall result, but it's still worth investigating that and seeing whether the overall picture gets changed. But there are other questions we haven't really had time to go through today, but these are the sort of things we could look at. So what was the impact of the outage or the outages? Do we see after the outages more people talking about switching phones? Do people who are mentioning EE also start mentioning O2 or Vodafone to start seeing whether or not they want to swap across those? Especially maybe looking in forums, people looking in detail about how they might want to get out of the contract. So was this just a blip? Has it actually changed people's perceptions of the brand longer term? We also may want to look at how do the actual operators themselves deal with the negativity. So how are they using their own social media channels to respond to people complaining, and then we can get some good insights out of that. We can also look at, on the other side, what is driving the positive content. So we've focused on the negative, and again, I think there is a bias in this subject area for people talking negatively. I feel most people are actually quite happy with their network providers. Most EE customers probably are happy, but when you're happy, people don't necessarily go on Twitter or social media and say that they're happy. They tend to be more disposed to saying something negative. So again, what I'm not saying here is that all of these people are, generally speaking, dissatisfied with their network providers. The insight comes by comparing them to each other to see proportionally which one has a bigger problem. They're probably actually overall pretty good, all of them. But those are the sort of things that we could do. So answering the right questions, and if you are the one producing the report, when somebody comes to you with a brief, always try to go a little bit extra to go behind the questions that you're asking. If you're the one requesting the report, put these questions to the people doing your analysis and see if they can come up with answers. Also, I just want to spend a little bit of time now just finally looking at what does good look like. And then here, the key things are to look at the wider subject area. We want to look at things like volumes day by day for the overall subject matter. We want to get an idea how much variation is there. So, for example, if there's a celebrity doing something, or if there's an event, does that create a significant shift in the overall volumes of people talking about it? And then what does top content look like? And if you are trying to put content out there, you want to get engagement around a post, and you want to plan some campaigns, how are you going to know whether or not your campaign is actually working, whether you're getting the right sort of engagement with your content? So I'm going to just look at that a bit now in the B2B consultancy space, so slightly different area to where we were before. So I'm now looking here at 4 B2B consultancy firms: Accenture, Atos, Capgemini, and Infosys. And I've just got a kind of day-by-day volume breakdown of people talking about these businesses. And you can see here that actually the biggest spikes here are to do with Atos. There's quite a few large spikes, sometimes getting over 10,000 posts a day. I'm actually here just looking at European content in English. So some big spikes for Atos, but to go into those, anyone who's not familiar, Atos do technical consultancy, but they've also been running the UK government's work of disability to benefit schemes, so getting people off benefits into work, and they assess whether people need to get disability benefits, and they've been heavily criticised for that. So a lot of those spikes are actually about that. It's nothing to do with the sort of areas where they compete with these other guys. So you may decide actually, let's program into all this data a way of identifying content that's actually related to business intelligence, and we're actually doing some reporting in the space. So let's now categorize that and then see what's going on. So the volumes drop massively, but this is a key area. And what we can see is actually the blue line there is Accenture. So they're actually the ones doing better, and you can see that a spike in this area, we're looking more around sort of 100 to 150 posts. It's quite niche and quite targeted. But it's important to do that, start getting an idea that if you're putting content together for one of these, maybe for an agency and one of these guys as your clients, what's a kind of a significant amount of people to be talking about one of these subject areas. We also want to look at the share of voice. So here, the share of voice, 44% overall for Accenture, but again, there's a lot of job postings, and Atos gets a lot. But then if we limit it to the BI space, we actually see Accenture getting 58% share of voice, whereas Capgemini actually goes from 9 to 22%. So again, it's by listing, by looking at the competitor set and then going deeper into looking at a particular subset, you start to see different pitch in terms of share of voice. And then we want to actually add in IBM services who have a significantly larger share of voice, so that they're 67% there. So if you are actually looking at them in the space as well, you may want to look at the sort of volumes that they're getting to get an understanding how big the gap perhaps is between you or your client and one of the bigger players in the sector. But then let's start thinking about what maybe one of the subject areas we want to look at in this area is big data. So we can see here's one of the top tweets where one of these firms was mentioned in connection with big data was from Atos, talking about them acquiring Bull, and that got retweeted 88 times, which is actually the top tweet amongst those four competitors when it's related to big data. But then we see with Accenture they've got 17 tweets, and again if you bring an IBM to the mix, this is their top tweet, 127. So the question, if I'm just looking at that, is that a lot? Should I be, if I'm maybe producing this report, maybe I am one of these companies and the insights guy there, or I'm in the agency working with them, is that a lot? Is 127 retweets about something to do with big data a lot? Well, the only way to answer that is to actually listen to the wider conversation about big data as a whole, to start getting an idea of what numbers we can start to look at. So this is actually the top tweet about big data in the last year, I think it was. I'd say last 6 months, from this chap Eric Redmond. Some people still refer to 100 gigabytes as big data, and there's a picture. And that got retweeted nearly 3,500 times. And there's actually on the comments, there's a huge discussion just in the comments on Twitter on here. And he's just got this nice little picture here showing how this little SD card has gone from 128 meg to 128 gig. And that's the top tweet. And then this guy's actually only got 2,000 followers, so considerably fewer followers than some of the corporate accounts, Twitter pages. And so you may think, well, if you're planning a campaign, actually, 100 tweets, 100 retweets, even a few, even 1,000 retweets is not a lot compared to what this guy's got, just by having a really simple piece of information and an image to go with it. You can also look at this sort of thing. Noah Smith, this is a guy who's got, I think it's about 7,000 followers, so quite a bit more. Some of the companies may not get as many followers as him. And he's done this nice little infographic looking at dodgy correlations of big data. So we've got here, I don't know if you can read that, but this is looking at, I think, Facebook posts and Bitcoin, and this one here looking at just a mountain. So go and have a look at that, and that's actually quite relevant to the subject matter today. But you get an idea of the sort of levels of engagement that you can start getting in this subject area. And these guys are not, hugely influential, but they've got a reasonable following. And then you've got this fellow, Bernard Marr, who's actually got, I think, 77,000 followers on Twitter. So that is really quite a lot. And he's just put this tweet out here, what is big data? And he's then shared a link to his SlideShare. And that SlideShare has actually got here about 130,000 reads on views on SlideShare. So again, I'm just kind of conscious of time. Just wanted to give a bit of an illustration as to how looking at big data as an overall theme, you start to see that every day you're getting between, in a low day to the weekends, 5,000 posts a day, up to 10 to 12,000 posts every day about social media, big data. So if you are working in the space and you're working with those companies, obviously big data is a hot topic. There's lots of people talking about it. It's hard to see, but there's, actually if you look at this over a long time period, even events on it don't necessarily move the dial massively. But that's just important to get a background in terms of the sort of volumes maybe to expect. So just to recap then, 3 things we've looked at today: how to get the most out of automated sentiment analysis. So we talked about focusing on positive versus negatives, taking the neutral out. We talked about, again, limiting the analysis to Twitter and Facebook, potentially then extending that to forums if you're working in in an area where people actually want to post anonymously or they want to post in more detail. We also looked at how to slice data, so creating categories, trying to align that with your PR messaging where you can, but also then looking at the organic content, trying to spot any themes and trends, and then to program rules to categorize that content so you can actually quantify what's happening. And then finally, just to get an idea to look at what good might look like, it's listening beyond the brands, which I'm slightly touching here on what the second session will be about, where we're going to be looking at horizon scanning and influencers, but this hopefully gives you an idea as to how to go about planning what sort of objectives to have in terms of getting engagement or the sort of content that you might put out as part of the campaign. And just to repeat the forthcoming sessions, part 2 on the 11th of June is Listening Beyond the Brand, Horizon Scanning, and part 3 on July the 2nd, looking at influence in a bit more detail. So that's me for today. We've got about a bit more than 10 minutes to take some questions. First question here is, do you know of any social tools to help dissect an account's followers? Okay, so I'm guessing that is about trying to see on a specific Twitter handle who is actually following the profiles of the people following them. Well, there are a number of tools that do that. So I think there are tools like Simply Measured, Social Bakers. I think Systematic do that to an extent. But I would actually say that not too bothered about followers. What I would focus on if I'm trying to get insight into that, because anybody can follow an account. Some people just follow you back. They don't necessarily pay attention to what you're doing. If you've got someone who's following 10, 20, 30,000 people, how much attention are they going to pay to you? I would actually recommend focusing more on people who have been mentioning you, people who have actually been engaging with your content. And so I would focus on engagement here to actually understand the profiles of the people who are mentioning you, and they may or may not actually follow you. I would also look at people who are actually engaging with hashtags. So these are people who may not mention you as a brand, they may not follow you, but they may use hashtags that you're using around a campaign or around an event. And so that's, because I think the goal here is to try and understand what's popular with the audience that you're trying to engage with. Followers, obviously, it's a good clue. You're more likely to be seen by people who follow you. And there are tools, but typically, just me personally, I don't tend to really get involved in looking at follower profiles much. There are various free tools. I don't know who asked this question, but if you want me to link to some of those, maybe just tweet me or email me afterwards, and I can mention a couple. I've got a couple more questions here. I'm just trying to read one on the Citrix here. Okay, here's a question. What tool would you recommend to collate pie charts and exclude words from sentiment analysis? Well, I guess I'd recommend our tool here. But there are other tools that can be used, but definitely we do that a lot. We have been doing social media analysis for a number of years, and we went through quite an extensive, because this kind of exclusion of content and drilling into data is a very important part of our analysis. So we've actually partnered with Brandwatch to power the technology, and they are now part of the Gorkana toolset. So we've got experience of doing that. If you do want to kind of actually know specifically, I don't know whether the person asked actually uses that tool and needs to know more about this, but if you are working with us already and you want to know specifically how to go about doing some of the things I've mentioned in the webinar, just let us know either via email or through Twitter, and we can maybe get a more detailed training session for you on that. So one question coming through Citrix here. When you were taking us through the E positive versus negative and background and spikes, how long does it take on average to do all of those searches and drill down into the data? Okay, so well, because it depends who's doing it. I think one of the key things with these tools is that if you're regularly using them, I think you definitely do build up proficiency. I think the analysis I did, I spent about 45 minutes, I think it was, putting those analysis slides together, breaking that stuff down. But then again, I do this for my day job, but I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect maybe just to allow me an hour or two to take that sort of volume and then to go and dissect it. I definitely think it's worthwhile taking time to go into detail to try and figure out what's going on behind it. But so that would just be kind of a rough guide for me. It allows us between an hour to 2 hours to go into detail. Some tools you can do the same things, but it's going to take you a lot longer. I know, I won't mention any names, but I know of one agency who uses a competitor tool, and they have to export all the data to Excel and then do the analysis in that, and I personally would not want to have to do that myself. So you can sometimes get the same results, but using the right tools can be a big time saver to help you get the insights out quicker. And there's another one on here. you mentioned excluding e-commerce activity for sentiment analysis. Could you give a bit more background on what you would exclude and why? Okay, so again, this depends on the sector, but let's say if it's in travel, you may see people that, there's various people using social media to promote themselves, and they may be a travel agency, and they'll be posting, buy cheap flights to this destination, or get a discount on hotels with this brand. Or it could be, we do a lot of work in the consumer electronics space, so you could get people posting about getting discounts on the latest Sony or Samsung or Apple phones. And again, if you're pulling that through in your analysis, that can often look to the automated analyzer like really positive content. And that content is going to be positive because it's people trying to sell a product, but it's not really telling you what customers are doing. So there's often in social media, there's lots of different voices, there's lots of different agendas, all trying to achieve different things. So you may want to then look for, sometimes you may want to look for links to common e-commerce platforms. Sometimes people will use hashtags like hashtag deals or deal of the day. We'll often look at the top authors. So you may see that when you look at your top authors, quite often there'll be their own brand channels, but then there'll also be people just spewing spammy content on Twitter, and you maybe just want to put some of the worst offenders in e-commerce into a blacklist and exclude them from your results. So there's various different ways you can remove that out of the equation. Okay, another question here. How regularly do you recommend compiling reports? Some businesses just have one person with a social media hat, and often this is one of the many hats they wear. If analysis takes an expert such as yourself, thank you very much, an hour or two, this can be a time-consuming process if social media is one of many responsibilities. Okay, so good question. I suppose it depends on how important social media is for you as a business and what sort of insights you want to get out of it. So I think sometimes the person who's got the social media hat, sometimes that person is maybe the person in charge of actually communicating through social media. So sometimes the question is, whose responsibility should this be really? So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're the comms person, the PR person actually managing the Twitter account, you need to do that reporting. Increasingly, I'm seeing clients actually have got an insights function, an insights person, using social media analysis to help actually plan, some of their future product development. And so if you are doing that, you may want to do that, you're not going to be changing your plans on a monthly basis, but it may be worth looking at on a quarterly basis. But again, if it's more tactical, if you've got a crisis going on and you really need to be able to respond to what's going on, you may want to actually look at it even on a weekly basis. Some clients actually get us to do reports on a daily basis if they're having a particular important product launch or a major crisis going on. The other thing to say as well is that this is also the question of, do you need to do it in-house, or is it actually going to be, worthwhile hiring somebody? There are various agencies on the call who I know do some of this for clients. We also do it, so you may actually think, well, we do need this data. We don't necessarily have the time. If you're not in the tool regularly, again, there can sometimes be a bit of a learning curve if you want to do the really in-depth analysis. And you may think actually, it'll be done more efficiently if we've got somebody who's, familiar with using these sort of tools. The other thing to say as well is that once you've gone and got the service set up, sometimes it's just a case of repeating the data, and the first report may take a while, but then the following reports may be a lot quicker because you're just effectively rerunning a similar set of categories and charts, and you're just running the same sort of benchmark. So get some help from the expert, perhaps setting up the first one, but then you can run that again afterwards. Okay, and I just want to see what other questions we've got here. I've got quite a few questions I think I might need to pick up offline. So do you include assessments on incorrectly used spelled hashtags? Yes, definitely, if that's sizable. So when we're tracking, for example, Vodafone in the results, people spell that wrong sometimes, so you want to pick that up. Hashtags may also be used wrong, especially when you've got an event, and you may want to actually group them together. So, for example, the Mobile World Congress, these sometimes have hashtag MWC, NWC 2014. There may be a whole variety of different hashtags, and I would recommend trying to group those together just to get an overview of the event as a whole. but definitely do try to spot incorrect spellings or wrong hashtags in your analysis. And just another question on Citrix here. If working on a campaign that runs for just 3 months, how regularly should you analyze data? Okay, again, it depends on how frequently you are putting new content out. If you're just running a report at the end of the campaign and you figure out that actually you did something wrong, you're a bit late. So you may want to actually look at trying to get some reactive data even in the first week, just to see if you're kind of getting sort of results that you want. So I think it depends on how much resource you're putting in. If you're putting a lot of time and effort into the report, it definitely makes sense just to spend a couple of hours each week looking and benchmarking how you're actually performing and seeing if you're getting the sort of results that you want. So just going to pick up, I think, one last question here. I've got the paper to wade through here. That one there. Okay. There's one question here. Actually, it's a more general question. How do you become verified on Twitter? So that's actually a little bit of a mystery. There is, I think, a section on Twitter that explains the process, but that is actually purely up to Twitter. There was, I think, just in the UK, we've just had the European elections, and for the first time ever, we've had a party other than the big two win the election, the UK Independence Party, and they were complaining that their main Twitter account still isn't verified, and none of their key people are verified on Twitter. So they've been complaining about Twitter bias. So even someone like UKIP, who just the kind of the hot political party at the moment, can't get verified. It's a little bit of a dark art. No one really knows exactly how Twitter go about it. Some accounts get verified almost instantly when it's a celebrity. So I do believe there is actually a section on the Twitter page where it explains it. So whoever asked that question, maybe you can just tweet me directly and I can dig out the link for you. But I'm still going to be around on Twitter, so if there are any burning questions that people want to ask and we've run out of time to go to now, please do fire them through to us, and I'll do my best to either answer them over Twitter, or we might just want to put some of the stuff together and put a blog post together. Okay, well, thank you all very much for listening, and hope to see you in the future sessions. Thanks.